Chapter 4: The Outsider. The difference between predator and prey in a business ecosystem is determined by the strength of one's next idea. It's like watching a nature documentary where the cheetah stalks the herd's weakest wildebeest. Happens all the time in the real world. You don't have to be the fastest wildebeest to survive. You just never want to be the slowest. When the opportunity presents itself, pounce. I know from painful experience that blockbusters don't just happen. For that matter, sustained and continuous success is never a given, least of all if you are an outsider. I have got many battle scars to prove it. Early in the process of ramping up our studio model in preparation for what I knew was going to be a long, hard journey full of ups and downs, I immersed myself in films to get a feel of what was out there and to understand what worked and what didn't. In 2006, I saw Anurag Basu's slick thriller Gangster. Immediately, I knew that Anurag was a special director, a born storyteller with a film lover's eye, an artist who created moods and responses, and an actor's director with the uncanny ability to draw out performances. Most of all, he had the guts to pull it off. When I walked out of the cinema hall that evening, I called Anurag out of the blue to tell him how much I had enjoyed Gangster. We ended the conversation agreeing that we should try to collaborate on a project in the future. Frankly, I didn't know if much would come out of our discussion. It had been my first real conversation with Anurag since his days in television. It had been a long time since we had spoken, and relationships and dynamics are known to change overnight in this business. But I followed through relentlessly. And within a year, and based on that one brief call, Anurag and I sat for countless sessions throwing out more ideas than we could develop. Things moved fast. We did the fabulous, edgy Life in a Metro in 2007. Coming as it did on the heels of some breakout movies from our fledgling studio, the film cemented our role as Bollywood outsiders, as innovators storming the ramparts. Metro's 4 vignettes intertwine 9 personal relationships in Mumbai. The film's creative genius and its audience appeal lie in this interconnectedness, the links between the stories and the comings and goings from beginning to end. The masterstroke, a bit of cinema really disruptive at that time, was having a band of musicians singing and transitioning from scene to scene. On the strengths of the film's critical and commercial success, Anurag and I decided to do his next 2 movies together. In Bollywood, as in life, though, things don't always go to plan. Anurag is a creative genius. Like most geniuses, he can be mercurial and eccentric. To reach his full creative potential, he needs to be left alone. He's the guy you talk to twice a day for weeks at a time, and then suddenly he disappears off to dream and create. All a part of the process of working with a top-notch director's vision. So 6 months after finishing Metro and disappearing like a puff of smoke, Anurag popped up at the office one day with a slightly guilty look. He was there to tell me that he'd been approached by one of the industry's top stars and the star's father, also a director, to work together. The catch was, and this certainly explained his guilty demeanor, they wanted to produce the movie on their own. Our 2-movie commitment would have to wait. Anurag thought this could be his big break. He asked for my blessings for the project, even though we had an agreement. We've all been told a handshake is sufficient and a word is as good as oak, but businesses often turn in unexpected ways. Although my policy is never to compromise, you've got to be realistic. If enforcing an agreement isn't productive, then do what's best to protect a long-term business and a relationship. If the long term is no longer relevant, maybe enforcing a clause is best. In India, legal remedies takes a decade or more. Even time heals wounds faster than the law. Our discussion that day took all of 2 minutes. I wished Anurag the best of luck with no hard feelings. In any relationship, professional or personal, one sees where passion lives. Then, more than ever, we both knew that anything we worked on would have to be worth the wait. Anurag took almost 2 years to finish his pet project Kites with Hrithik Roshan. Seemingly undaunted by the experience, Anurag was game to start the process all over again with us. It's not all formed in my mind, and it's not a narration, a very basic screenplay, Anurag said one day out of the blue about his latest idea. And he spent the next half hour framing the thinnest plot and storyline I'd ever heard. No dialogue, little action. Yet, as Anurag spoke, the emotions came through so strongly, with the characters springing to life, that I couldn't help being intrigued by the creative dance playing out in his head. I sat with Siddharth Sid Roy Kapoor, who headed our studio at UTV and later became the managing director of Disney in India after I moved on, listening to the narration in stunned silence, moved to the core. Anyone present at that meeting would think us mad to greenlight a film based on such a sketchy story. But I knew Anurag and his thought process. I could not only understand but also see how the story would take shape under the careful kneading of his capable hands. I don't think the movie will have more than 30 or 40 lines of dialogue, he said with a shrug. It's all in the mood, the feel of the story, the music, and most importantly, the three leads. Sid and I were at the edge of our seats, considering what could be another first in UTV's movie-making journey. What the hell, we thought. If Anurag can't pull this off, no one can. And if UTV wouldn't take a chance with breaking new ground in filmmaking, who would? We dove headlong into producing Barfi. Ranbir Kapoor, Priyanka Chopra, and Ileana D'Cruz magically embodied the characters Anurag had envisioned in those early meetings. They quickly became iconic heroes after their stellar performances. As for the music, it was the narrative and set the mood beautifully. Like all films, Barfi had its own challenges, many of them. Our first scheduling in Darjeeling saw heavy rain. We shot for over 10 days and after seeing the rushes scrapped everything. Because the film revolved almost entirely around emotions, the time taken for each day's shooting stretched. Even with a talented and professional cast, the demands of the film were so immense, it took a toll on everyone. But Barfi broke hearts and trends at the box office, and in the end, it was well worth the wait. People forget that UTV's early days in Bollywood were anything but rosy. Selective memory sometimes isn't a bad thing for an entrepreneur, except when he forgets to hold on to past lessons. Because of our positive attitude and constant forward motion, we at UTV are remembered mostly for our successes. Entertainment can be a fickle business. In films, have a couple of down years and slow down greenlighting or let the wrong message leak to the popular press, and everyone around you sounds the death knell. The difference between Predator and Prey in Bollywood is the reception of your next film. It's like watching a nature documentary where the cheetah stalks the herd's weakest wildebeest. You want to look away, but you can't. Happens all the time in the real world. You don't have to be the fastest wildebeest to survive. You just never want to be the slowest. Think like a predator, and when opportunity presents itself, make the best of it. Bollywood is also about making a statement, about being seen. For anyone with too thin a skin, Bollywood can be a lonely, unforgiving place. If we had slowed down every time we had a bad year, our viewers would have a completely different perception about our movie studio today. It's the same with most businesses. How you react to your setbacks and your successes determines the way forward. We struggled frequently for the first 3 or 4 years in this business vertical. Although we were proud of the work we did and what we were building, I could see the team was stressed with the load the studio model was putting on the whole company. One day, Ronald DeMello, my CFO at that time, walked into my room and sat me down. I think we need to partner with someone familiar with this model. We can't go on our own for the long term, he said. And then he reminded me of what so many inside the company thought, even if they wouldn't say it out loud. We're outsiders, Ronnie, and we'll remain outsiders unless we align with someone. I could see his point, and what he said made sense. Ronald always spoke in the company's and the team's best interest. I told him I would think about his suggestion. Still, creative processes, greenlighting, and managing talent and relationships aren't about reaching a consensus. In fact, this applies to most sectors and businesses. I was concerned I would never be able to build our own identity or brand if we took on a partner. 2 weeks later, Ronald walked back into my cabin to ask if I had started any dialogue. Now, we both knew that I'm not someone who needs reminding, but he was right to nudge me. He could see "not convinced" written all over my face. My deal with the team was that I would begin discussions and consider partnering only if everyone stayed totally focused on the company's growth plan. The last thing I wanted was to have the business division on hold and decisions coming to a halt. And so I embarked on some interesting and varied negotiations. My first call was to Yash Chopra at Yash Raj Studios. In his typical unassuming manner, as if he always had the time for everyone at any hour, he told me I could drop in that day or the next. I drove to Yashji's the next day, wondering along the way how best to pitch the idea of a partnership. Sure, we had done some path-breaking work and were an emerging player, but here I was approaching a legendary family-run organization that had been at the top of Bollywood heap for decades. Careful not to make my thoughts sound like a formal proposal, I could not take Yashji's interest for granted. We began a fantastic hour-long chat. Yashji was one of the nicest human beings I'd ever met. Humble, approachable, always lost in thought, but lest anyone think him scattered, he was also the most attentive person in the room, conversing fluently on a range of issues from Bollywood to social justice and the politics of Kashmir. He never really answered my question, though he wasn't rude or dismissive in any way. Instead, every time I broached the subject of a partnership, his replies took different, delightful tangents. We laughed and chatted. During my fourth attempt at bringing the reason for my visit back on track as subtly as possible, I mentioned how a combination of the two studios would mean a larger slate of films and how we could combine our strengths overseas and grow the market. With that, Yashji, too respectful to tell me outright that I just wasn't getting his message, dived straight into the details of a great 4-day trip he had recently taken to Australia for a festival. A memorable visit, and one door closed. Years later, when Yashji passed away, I recalled our meeting and his abiding courteousness and humility. His body had been placed in one of Yash Raj Studios' shoot floors for people to pay their respects before the funeral. I happened to be standing in a corner. An hour passed, and then 2, and only when the sea of visitors was asked to move on did I make a quiet exit. Those were tranquil and contemplative hours for me, in a room with a soul I deeply admired. My next port of call was Amitabh Bachchan Corporation Limited, ABCL. Amitabh Bachchan and his family were looking to rekindle the company and their studio model, so I knew this could be an interesting proposition from both sides. Amitabh Bachchan and his family were looking to rekindle the company and their studio model, so I knew this could be an interesting proposition for both sides. We had 2 detailed meetings. In the second, Amitji, Jayaji and Abhishek were present, along with their management teams, bringing high-powered external resources to help them with their decision-making. When an external resource or consultant joins any discussion, that entity needs to prove his value. Often, his presence isn't wholly productive. That second meeting didn't get very far, and we let it pass. At the same time, global majors, Sony Columbia Pictures and 20th Century Fox, were looking to expand into India with local slates, as their Hollywood fare in the country had failed to strike a meaningful chord. In fact, till date, Hollywood accounts for less than 10% of the Indian box office. Both approached us for a possible joint venture or an exclusive long-term deal to develop movies together. Sony came in first, so with full transparency, we shared the news with Fox. The negotiations with Sony were complicated, but we made good progress. In 60 days, we had a draft agreement, thanks to some aggressive back and forth from both sides and long calls and meetings. We also had 2 clear deal breakers. I had interacted with Michael Linton, the chairman of Sony Pictures, in prior meetings before his proposal had come up. Michael is a phenomenal individual, extremely knowledgeable and clear about what he wants to do and why, and I had and have the greatest respect for him. Given how far we had reached with Sony and my trust in Michael, I was ready to bend on one of the two sticky points and look to them to resolve the other. On the first point, Sony wanted the right to exclude at their discretion up to 3 movies a year from the deal. For us, it was all or nothing. The second point was the percentage we would charge as our production fee. On that, we were open. At 9:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, we began a call to close out the final issues. Unfortunately, Michael was not on that call. Less than 2 minutes in, one of the 3 or 4 senior executives on the line told us that they couldn't move on either point. We had until midnight, about 2.5 hours, to conclude the deal. Sometimes one sees American arrogance and superiority with a know-it-all, we call the shots approach. This was one of those moments. I also found it presumptuous that the team assumed we would stay up until midnight to take a call. If roles had been reversed, I know that not one of them would have agreed to stay up in the US to wrap up a deal. Clearly, if and once we signed, that arrogance wouldn't just disappear. The alliance, we decided, wouldn't be to anyone's benefit. No need for another call at midnight, I told them evenly. We won't be going forward. After a moment's pause, I guess partly because they may not have been used to having such a request denied, they quickly offered to move their own deadline by a day so I could give the proposal some more thought. The next day, we fielded some savage calls, but for us, the moment had passed. Did I get the gravitas of what I was letting pass? Of course. Here was a major Hollywood studio offering to give us credibility with their endorsement via a joint venture. Sony were putting in 50% of all costs and investments for a proposed period of 5 years, all renewable. At that time, their contribution would cross 5 billion rupees, more than $100 million then, and they would help with global distribution. But what good would all that be, given our uneasy relationship before the deal had even been struck? Without mutual respect and trust, all alliances eventually crumble. If results suffered, as they inevitably would in an unhappy partnership, we would be the guys on the block, taking all the blame and accountability. Signing an agreement or a deal brings great excitement, but the measure of any deal is its ultimate success. And so we engaged with Fox. We had history and a relationship since News Corp had already invested in UTV. Again, we moved with pace and quickly came to an agreement on all points. The one small problem was that the executive team that had made all this progress had not sounded off the head of the studio, Jim Geniopoulos, on the deal. Jim is one of the smartest executives in the world, charismatic the way Greeks often are, sharp as they come and blunt as well. He was clear that though Fox was keen on the India market, the organization wasn't ready to back everything UTV had discussed with the executive team. For one, he wanted to cherry-pick the films that Fox co-produced. That made no sense to us. In the end, Fox 2 was a closed chapter. Eventually, we would partner with them for Meera Nair's The Namesake and Manoj Naik Shyamalan's The Happening. But that was for the future. A future neither of us could predict while negotiating. Great learnings from 4 varied interactions, 4 closed doors, and no solution in sight. So when I sat with my team to review my full odyssey, I sensed skepticism all round. Come on, Ronnie, you never wanted this to happen in the first place, I could see them thinking. We know you. If you had set your mind to it, we would have closed this out by now. Honestly, I had given every negotiation my absolute best. In my 4 interactions, 2 of our potential Indian partners had told us, albeit very politely, that we were outsiders. They were probably right. The other 2 made us feel like outsiders. At the same time, I was relieved in some small way at what had come to pass. I've never believed that consensus management makes good business sense in terms of identity and brand. In retrospect, If the joint venture had become a reality with any of those potential partners, we would have been a very different studio model in the overall UTV group. What can you take away from our earlier experiences? When you're starting out in any business, everybody gladly tells you this is how things get done. Sure, recognize their experiences, but people tend to give experiences more credence than they should, and often overestimate the value of free advice. Outsiders follow their instincts and those of their team and colleagues. That's how business gets done. If someone, even someone you trust, gives you advice that doesn't make sense, go with your gut. Our outsider mentality energized the team, and we never could have succeeded if we tried to copy everyone else's model or listened to those who had half-baked, well-intentioned ideas. We were confident because going against the grain was our strength. You can't climb to the pinnacle of the media game in India, or anywhere in the world for that matter, without a big screen attraction to your name. Our entry into Bollywood didn't leave room for half measures. By our 5th year, we had multiple films in production at all times, and we were scaling. For more than a decade, we maintained that average. Our mantra was to learn from past mistakes, fail forward and fail fast, move on and keep that cycle chugging along, even if it misfired every once in a while. The successes were sweet, but never made us too high. The failures were expected and never laid us low. Even in the early days, our gut told us, stay with this, you will succeed. We did a lot of non-conventional cinema and positioned, marketed and distributed it to become successful commercially as well. I would say every other movie we made fell into this bucket and was clutter-breaking. Khosla Ka Ghosla, Fashion, Kai Po Che, Kamine, Pan Singh Tomar, Peepli Live, Udaan, Delhi Belly, Swades and Rajniti, among many others. Make no mistake, these were hardcore commercial films, yet they were unlike anything audiences had ever seen. Like most forward-looking entrepreneurs, we knew the market because of a constant connection with and attention to our core audience nationwide, and via interactive touchpoints in our television and new media businesses. For instance, in 2008, a Wednesday took audiences by surprise, even if our research and gut told us it could be a breakout film. A seemingly straightforward terrorist plot unfolding over 4 hours on a Wednesday, the film turns on the fact that the suspected bomber is really a vigilante fighting for the rights of the common man. The movie was executed simply and realistically. Leads Naseeruddin Shah, whose work spans 4 decades and over 100 films, and Anupam Kher, a Bollywood veteran who also acted in Woody Allen's You Will Meet a Tall Dark Stranger and later in David Russell's Silver Linings Playbook, brought valuable experience to the screen. Both immensely talented actors were made for their roles in a Wednesday. Naseer as the vigilante and Anupam as the world-weary Mumbai Police Commissioner looking for a way out. Neeraj Pandey, a superbly talented first-timer who delivered the film's message with precision and clarity, wrote and directed it, winning the Indira Gandhi Award for the best first film. A Wednesday was an important part of the evolution of UTV in Bollywood and contributed to my own learnings. In honesty, I hesitated to throw my weight behind the end product after watching the rough cuts. I had 2 nagging thoughts. One, that the film's message was simplistic and the canvas small. Once word got out, audiences would wait for the television release instead of seeing the movie in the theatre. And 2, that we should have made the film on a bigger scale instead of a shoestring budget of rupees 30 million, about $500,000. I'm happy to say I was wrong on both counts, and I'm glad to this day that I didn't put my foot down on either point. Given my earlier recommendations of going with one's gut, you may think that my decision to go ahead with the film was counterintuitive. But here's a corollary to the rule. Trusting team judgment is equally important, especially when the core thinking is in complete sync. In this case, the team took the right call. Stellar performances, relentless suspense, A quirky narrative and an unexpected twist made the movie a runaway success. A year later, we released Dev D, our riskiest effort till that point. A mad, wacky, edgy genre film that totally subverted the Indian cinema model. Dev D required a lot of lateral thinking and balls of steel. Although both A Wednesday and Dev D were massive hits, when I first heard the storyline for the latter from Anurag Kashyap, I had no idea what to think. Wild was the first word that came to my mind, but after that, nothing. The talented and eccentric Anurag Kashyap sees himself as the Martin Scorsese or the Quentin Tarantino of India. In a way, I suppose he is. With Dev D, he proposed a contemporary take on one of India's epic love stories, Devdas. Kashyap wanted to modernize it beyond recognition, yet stay within the fabric of the original story, which follows the growing relationship between childhood sweethearts Devdas and Paro. Combined with a powerful live music backing track, Kashyap's vision held promise. Besides, he had earned quite a reputation for keeping projects under budget while giving his movies a rich feel, which didn't hurt his chances for success. Zarina, Sid Kapoor, executive producer Vikas Bahl, Kashyap and I watched the first cut in the edit room. By the halfway point, everyone had fallen in love with the film, the characters, the narrative's freshness, the way the music blended into the story. We knew that moving forward with such a groundbreaking film would require a huge leap of faith. But that wasn't going to stop us. It never did. We backed it all the way. For the premiere, we selected one of the oldest single-screen theatres in Mumbai to give the film the atmosphere it deserved. Unfortunately, I could only stay until the interval, rushing to the airport to board a non-stop flight to New York City to negotiate a proposed joint venture with Bloomberg the next day for our business news channel. As the plane taxied on the runway at the Mumbai airport, I was flooded with texts from dozens of audience members, friends and family, all going ballistic about the movie. Each predicted a runaway hit. The last text I received before losing network was from Sid, telling me that the film had got a 5-star review in a top newspaper, the first such rating in a decade. The extent to which we were outsiders came home with one particular instant in May 2002 at the Cannes Film Festival. We had just started thinking seriously about forming a motion pictures division at UTV, so Zarina and I traveled to Cannes for the film festival for the first time. Although we had been going to Cannes for the television festivals for years, so it wasn't all alien. We were scheduled to be there for just 3 days. On the last day, we heard that there was to be a midnight world premiere of Sanjay Leela Bhansali's Devdas, and that Shah Rukh Khan, Aishwarya Rai, Madhuri Dixit and Sanjay would be walking the red carpet. Zarina and I scurried for invites and, after much begging, pleading and waiting in line, managed to get 2 seats in the second balcony. We couldn't have been any farther from the VIP section. The invite said, dress code formal. Since I never owned a tuxedo, and still don't, as it's always slacks, t-shirts, and moccasins for me, off we went to rent one for the day. At 11 p.m., both Zarina and I, dressed in a sari and tux respectively, left our hotel to take a long walk down the promenade to the Palais Theatre. A strong crowd of over 1,000 fans, yes, 1,000 fans at midnight on the French Riviera for a Bollywood premiere, gathered to witness the spectacle. We ended up waiting along with them on the pavement to wave at cinema's heartthrobs. Soon a magnificent horse-drawn carriage arrived with Shah Rukh Khan, Ash, Madhuri and Sanjay standing in full glory, waving like the Queen of England. I was proud and inspired to see India front and center. Ash looked drop-dead gorgeous. Shah Rukh Khan, his usual dashing and charming self, as he will look all his life. Madhuri stunning. And Sanjay, every bit the director maestro. Zarina and I stood in line for 45 minutes to get to our seats. Even though the movie started late, as everyone was more interested in the stars, it was 3 hours of magic that ended in the middle of the morning. We went back to the hotel, changed, dropped off the rented tux in the late returns box of the shop, and drifted off to sleep at around 4:30 a.m. The taxi arrived at our hotel 2.5 hours later to trundle us to Nice for the long flight back to Mumbai. Neither Sanjay, Shah Rukh nor Aishwarya knew who we were that night, nor did we get a chance to say hello. And yet, in 2002, Shah Rukh and I signed for Chalte Chalte, our first co-production. We had known director Aziz Mirza from our television days. One meeting led to another, and there we were. That project was special for both of us. Shah Rukh's first movie from his own Red Chillies production house, and UTV's first big co-production. Standing on the pavement in Cannes and waving had got to me. I knew we had to move forward with our plans. Shah Rukh, in his inimitable way, told me, "I did wave back, you just didn't notice." Sanjay and I laugh about that memory too when we meet. "You and I are going on a ride in a horse-drawn carriage on the red carpet," he promises with a laugh. Even though Sanjay and I have done some successful movies together, including Guzarish and Rowdy Rathod, the carriage ride hasn't happened yet. I guess that moment has passed. From those first days in the industry, I think everyone liked and welcomed us because we were intentionally unimposing, confident without being arrogant, strong listeners without dominating every conversation. This was our true identity. Too often in India, mid-sentence interruption runs rampant. "Hey, I agree with you, but" could be the country's motto. In the creative world, meetings are little more than opportunities for self-styled visionaries to talk over one another without hearing a thing anyone else says. So it's refreshing and disappointingly rare when someone actually listens and waits for others to finish and crafts an intelligent, thoughtful response based on what had just been conveyed. It makes people feel respected. This guy is listening because he has noted all the small points and has come back on them. A small overture, but I think it made a massive difference in the way we were perceived earlier on. Never underestimate the power of the outsider. That me against the world mindset opens doors to entrepreneurial experience. How did our outsider status work for us? Well, in 2008, 2 years after Rang De Basanti, we had the great fortune of releasing yet another groundbreaking movie, Ashutosh Gowarekar's Jodha Akbar. It came with a risky plot and setting, and there were concerns that India's young populace wouldn't identify with the film's history and dialect, which was nothing like the Hindi we speak now. We needn't have worried. On the strength of a brilliant story and transcendent performances by Hrithik Roshan and Aishwarya Rai, Jodha Akbar became an international sensation, a big-budget blockbuster. Since the success of Rang De Basanti in 2006 and until the release of Barfi in 2012, UTV swept the awards for 3 of those 7 years. In the same span of 7 years, 3 of our films were India's official entry to the Oscars. And at the National Awards, given annually by the President of India, UTV's films won 25 national awards for 9 films, 10 times more than any individual or corporation has been awarded till date. Such a clean sweep over such a short period of time was a great sense of pride for the entire team and the company as a whole. For truth be told, none of the films that had established us as outsiders were easy to greenlight. UTV grew heat privately and in the media for taking risks that no other studio or individual producer or director would take. Identity is often built on branding and creating impressions. Here was a classic case of branding, not through a campaign, but by doing pioneering work one could be proud of. Having said that, if the creative talent who dreamt stories and characters hadn't come to the outsiders in the first place, these breakout important visions may never have come to fruition on the big screen. Chapter summary. As a professional, a leader, or an entrepreneur, there will be times in your career when you'll be an outsider. Either because you have changed sectors or jobs or started a new business where full domain knowledge is not your core strength. Embrace this status. Be a quick learner and an even sharper listener. Build a team that complements yet challenges you and hones your skill sets, and get them aligned with the big picture sooner rather than later. I'm often asked about the keys to success as an outsider. The irony, I say, is that the raw material for any entrepreneur or leader to make an impact as an outsider comes from within. It's a lesson I've learned and relearned every day in the 2 decades I spent in the media and entertainment business.